Oh, this is Dr. Eric Mortensen, your professor, and today I want to talk a bit about logical fallacies. So the objectives are as follows. 1, to define logical fallacies. 2, to explain why they matter. 3, to describe different types of them. 4, to identify logical fallacies and explain the faulty logic. And 5, to practice resolving logical fallacies. Okay, logical fallacies are basically, something when you use an argument relies on bad assumptions or invalid evidence. It seems like the writer seems to be providing a logical kind of explanation, or it seems to kind of make sense. But when you look at it more closely, it's actually kind of problematic. Either the logic itself doesn't make sense, or the information is somehow wrong or biased. This is important because while it would seem that in some ways this would give your argument strength especially if the writer doesn't catch it. If they do catch it, it makes you look very bad, not only for your logos but for your ethos. Remember, logos is this appeal to logic, and ethos is appeal to the speaker. And obviously, if someone reads your work and it's relying on some kind of faulty reasoning, faulty logic, they can't. The reader's going to not really trust your logic. Your appeal to logos, to appeal to the logic of your argument isn't going to really hold, and it's going to undermine your credibility as a writer. So, if you can identify logical fallacies, you can strengthen your ethos. You come off as a writer who knows what they're talking about, who uses logical thinking, who's clear and precise, and is not out to sort of manipulate the reader, and that's going to sort of strengthen your argument. Okay, so we're going to look at 3 different types of logical fallacies in this presentation. Faulty evidence, faulty reasoning, and the misuse of pathos. And feel free, there's a lot of information on these slides. Feel free to pause it whenever you need to and read in more detail. I'll just go over the general basics of each slide. Faulty evidence. Faulty evidence occurs when a writer uses insufficient evidence, invalid evidence, or lack of evidence, or no evidence at all. This is a problem. Obviously, as you know from the tear paragraph structure, you need evidence. So if you've got a problem with your evidence, that's a problem. Here are the types. Hasty generalization occurs when a writer draws conclusions from insufficient or biased evidence. And you can see the examples here. I won't read through them. Snow job, basically this is when you try to overwhelm the reader with a bunch of information, and it's not all or none of it is relevant, right? You're just trying to kind of convince by this sheer number of facts that you're presenting. Appeals to ignorance. Basically, when a writer asserts that a claim is true simply because it hasn't been proven false, obviously that doesn't really hold, right? Argument from belief. This is when the writer claims that something is true despite evidence of the contrary, just basically because they believe it. Argument from disbelief occurs when a writer rejects a claim despite the evidence simply because he or she doesn't believe it is true. Circular reasoning is basically when you're using a claim as its own support. So he's ugly because he's so unattractive. Well, yeah. If you're going to call someone unattractive, they're going to be ugly. That doesn't really prove that that's the case. Okay, take a minute here to pause and practice. And you can go back to the earlier slides if necessary. Faulty reasoning, this is the second type. Fallacies of faulty reasoning occur when a writer builds an argument on invalid assumptions, either about how to interpret evidence, how to interpret an argument, or how to interpret a counterargument. So before we had evidence problem, now we're having reasoning problems. So the post hoc fallacy or faulty causality occurs when a writer assumes that since one thing happened before another, it must have caused the second. Right? Obviously, that doesn't have to be the case, but it can make for a compelling argument. The fallacy of the single cause is when a writer assumes an overly simple explanation for something and ignores other possible factors. Right? Things usually aren't that simple. Slippery slope, when a writer assumes without justification that a single cause will set an entire change of events into motion. Again, this is overly simplifying usually is oversimplification of things. Red herring occurs when a writer redirects attention away from the actual argument by changing the subject. Obviously, that's wrong. A straw man is basically when the writer misrepresents or oversimplifies an opposing argument, basically making it easier to dismiss it or counter it, right? And you have so basically you have to, in order to kind of convince your reader, you're going to have to kind of present another argument in its strongest claim. I mean, you can't. It's not really fair to sort of undermine someone else's more compelling argument just so it's easier to attack. Again, that might work in some cases, but if someone catches you out on it, if they go, wait a minute, hey, that's not really what that's arguing, then you really lose credibility in the eyes of the reader at that point. False dilemma occurs when a writer oversimplifies a complex argument or turns it into a black and white either-or choice, either binary, right? Again, that's not fair. You've been writing these papers, you realize things are never that simple, right? And to make them that simple is wrong. Okay, fallacy occurs when one assumes that an entire argument is valid because of a single error in reasoning. Just because someone makes one small mistake doesn't mean that their entire argument is wrong, right? And here's some more practice for faulty reasoning problems. Okay, misuse of pathos. These kinds of fallacies happen when an author overuses or misuses pathos to manipulate the reader. Again, pathos is an appeal to emotions, right? So an improper sort of appeal to the emotions. A bandwagon appeal occurs when a writer assumes that the reader should believe or do something simply because a lot of other people do it, right? Obviously, this isn't necessarily true. Just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean you should be doing it. Ad hominem attack is when a writer attacks a person making the argument rather than the ideas or logic that person presents, right? And again, you can attack somebody's argument or their ethos if it's relevant to what they're arguing. So if somebody's claiming that they're an authority in a particular field, you can question that. But just sort of attacking somebody personally for no reason, especially for something that doesn't relate to what they happen to be saying, who cares, right? Their argument, and regardless of whether you're right or wrong, doesn't mean their argument's necessarily wrong. Here's some more practice. Pause if needed. Some more practice. Pause if needed. And please, you can give me any questions, ask me any questions if you need to. Good luck.